Tonight we commemorate the birthday of the greatest revolutionary leader the world has ever seen, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. While Karl Marx was the author of Capital, Lenin was the author of the 1917 Socialist Revolution in Russia. It was the Russian Revolution that broke open the door to oppress people all over the planet. People fight for liberation and make their own revolutions. But without the Soviet Union extending over 1/6 of the earth, the slave masters on Wall Street and in London and Paris banks wouldn't have conceded independence to any of their colonies. Workers and peasants breaking their chains in old Russia inspired Chinese, Koreans, Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cubans to take destiny into their hands as well. Lenin was born on April 22, 1870, 550 miles east of Moscow in a town on the Volga River. At that time, a series of tyrants called Tsars ruled the vast Russian Empire. Serfdom, a form of semi-slavery, had been abolished in Russia just 9 years before Lenin's birth, abolished in 1861. John Brown and all the martyrs of Harper's Ferry may not have immediately freed the slaves, but they may have helped free the serfs. When Lenin was 17 years old, his older brother Alexander was hanged for trying to kill the Tsar. Jonathan Jackson was 17 years old, too, when he was killed trying to free his brother George Jackson, a field marshal in the Black Panther Party. Prisoners James McLean and William Christmas were also killed in this attempted jailbreak, and sole survivor Rochelle Cinque McKee has now spent over 50 years in jail. Jonathan Jackson never had an opportunity to develop himself as a revolutionary leader. His brother George would be assassinated a year later. Lenin was more fortunate. His father had been a school inspector in the Russian Empire. Lenin's dad was a decent man who wanted peasants to learn how to read and write, but he wasn't a revolutionary. Unlike the black workers George and Jonathan Jackson, Lenin was able to go to college. Although he was soon expelled for joining a demonstration, Lenin had time to study Marxism and labor movements in other countries. In 1895, Lenin helped form a revolutionary group in St. Petersburg, which was broken up by the Tsar's secret police. Lenin was sent to Siberia, where he spent several years researching and writing the development of capitalism in Russia. Populists who insisted that an industrial working class couldn't develop in Russia couldn't answer Lenin's book. After ending his Siberian exile, Lenin helped found a political newspaper called Iskra, or The Spark. The newspaper's title was inspired by a poem by Alexander Pushkin, a black man who is considered the father of Russian literature. Iskra had to be published outside Russia and smuggled into the country. Iskra's aim was to organize revolutionaries throughout Russia and help form a socialist party to overthrow the Tsar. We need to build the circulation and website views of Workers' World newspaper. In 1902, Lenin wrote What Is to Be Done, which is a textbook for communists. Lenin insisted that socialism will not come spontaneously and that the working class has to be saturated with communist class consciousness to make a socialist revolution. Today in the United States, class consciousness means supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and to demand reparations for black and indigenous people. It means fighting racist Trump and defending immigrants. Class consciousness means fighting for transgender rights. At the Party Congress in 1903, Lenin broke with his friend Julius Martov over what sort of party was needed. Lenin knew that to overthrow Tsarism and a developing capitalist class, a disciplined organization of revolutionaries was needed. Lenin's group became known as the Bolsheviks, or majority-ites, since they were a majority at the 1903 Congress. Bolsheviks and other socialists almost toppled the Tsar in the 1905 revolution. In 1914, when the big socialist parties in France and Germany capitulated and supported their own capitalists in the First World War, the Bolsheviks held firm. Lenin said that this bloody war was simply a fight between colonial slave masters over how many colonies they could exploit. Lenin declared, turn imperialist war into civil war. By 1917, workers and peasants in the Russian Empire had enough of this war that killed millions of poor people. On International Women's Day, which commemorates the strike of garment workers in New York City, women textile workers went on strike in St. Petersburg. 5 days later, the Tsar was overthrown, but another group of exploiters climbed into the saddle and refused to end the war. Lenin, coming back from exile in Switzerland, told the Bolsheviks that they had to patiently explain to workers and peasants why the new government was not their government. Bolsheviks raised the slogan of peace, land, and bread, meaning end the war, take the land from the landlords and give it to the peasants, and provide bread and jobs to the working class. Our Workers' World Party candidates, Monica Moorhead and Lamont Lilly, say Black Lives Matter, abolish capitalism, and disarm the police, ICE, and the Pentagon. All over the former Russian Empire, workers had sent up their own council called Soviets. We need to build the People's Power Assemblies to fight the power and win justice. Over 8 months, the Bolsheviks won over a majority of Soviets to support overthrowing the new capitalist regime led by Alexander Kerensky. On November 7, 1917, Kerensky was overthrown. Workers, peasants, soldiers, and sailors, organized through hundreds of Soviets and politically led by the Bolsheviks, took power into their own hands. The world was changed forever. By 1970, Lenin's writings had been translated into more languages than the New Testament. The reason that the capitalist liberals launched Earth Day on April 22, 1970, was to try to take the thunder away from people celebrating the centennial of Lenin's birth. Back in 1917, the overwhelming number of steel mills and factories were in Western Europe and the United States, so a majority of the working class were also in those countries. The vast majority of humankind lived in colonies which were just plundered. Many socialists in Western Europe and the U.S. didn't even think about what was called the colonial question, but Lenin did. The Russian Empire, like the United States today, was a prison house of oppressed nationalities. Trying to divert the revolutionary movement against the Tsar, his secret police organized anti-Jewish riots called pogroms. Nearly 200 black people died in a 1917 pogrom in East St. Louis. Hundreds more African Americans died in a 1921 Tulsa pogrom that burned down Black Wall Street. Bolsheviks fought pogroms gun in hand. Lenin defended the right of oppressed people to win freedom by any means necessary. The Soviet Union launched a decades-long affirmative action program that industrialized held-back peoples. This aid wasn't a one-way street. Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and 100 other peoples poured their blood in defeating Hitler. The Communist International, formed by Lenin in 1917, issued a new fighting slogan: workers and oppressed people of the world unite. Lenin's thesis on national and colonial questions reached Ho Chi Minh. Ho later wrote, "What emotion, enthusiasm, clear-sightedness, and confidence it instilled into me. I was overjoyed to tears. Though sitting alone in my room, I shouted aloud as if addressing large crowds. Dear martyrs, compatriots, this is what we need. This is the path to our liberation. I gradually came upon the fact that only socialism and communism can liberate the oppressed nations and the working people throughout the world from slavery." That's what Lenin meant for poor people all over the world. Long live the memory of Lenin. Build Workers' World Party.